Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the World Cup of Pokemon VGC, sponsored by Elgato, brought to you by Victory Road. My name is Maeve O'Rourke. I am very happy to be casting finals here with Gabby. You just had a really great last round with a little bit of unfortunate luck, which, for those of you guys who tuned into the pre-show yesterday, saw Jamie Boyd and Costa's match dealing with a little bit of the same unfortunate RNG. So sad to see that continue into the next day.
Yeah, well, it always seems to happen with Pokemon where there's so much on the line, especially in these big games like the grand finals here between Italy and Spain. And for whatever reason, the universe just decides it's not your day. But, shout outs to Marco. I think he really tried his best and made some great plays to try and even up the score, even, looking against that bad luck. And Ramsey's made those fantastic reads as well. And, going into the rest of these matches of the grand finals, I think we're going to continue to see a lot of these really powerful predictions and just really showcase why these players from these countries made it to the final stage.
Yeah, absolutely. And these players have shown especially how well they've played. We did get to see a breakdown of each of these matchups yesterday. Very excited to be able to feature our next match as well. But for those of you guys who got that sneak peek, things kind of look like you put it in a mirror and flipped it around. The teams seem very familiar. So if we want to cut over to our matchup showcase so we can see the 7 competitors here, or the 7 sets of competitors and the score now, we do know at least Spain currently has that one win with Ramses Quintana making that first win there. But now we have Manuel, Barea, and Daniele Spuntarelli from Spain and Italy respectively coming up for our second match here. So Daniele has a lot of pressure on him, I think, to kind of force that back into a tie and keep that momentum slowed for Spain here.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned like a mirror. I mean, if we're going to look at round 1 and look at the teams that these trainers are bringing into this round 2 and, maybe make a prediction on how round 2 is going to go, you would think that Danielle would be in the favorite to win, because when you look at the team that Danielle and Manuel are bringing to this round 2, it really is a virtually identical matchup from the first game. There are a couple of differences which we can talk about as we go into our player showcases. And we'll start with talking about Manuel's team, because I think that he has the most differences out of the two of them.
And there aren't really that many differences, Gabby, to be sure. Manuel, though, he is bringing Eternatus, Incineroar, Rillaboom, Suicune, Volcarona, and Aegislash. So Aegislash, Volcarona, Eternatus, a lot of what we saw in that last game, Gabby, but a couple of differences here as well.
Yeah, I really like the Aegislash. I was just talking about it last round, and there definitely has a lot of potential to be a very powerful Pokemon in this format. And we saw that Volcarona and the Eternatus as well just really have a great offense against the opposing team with that Zacian. But, there's no Whimsicott on this team. Instead, it's going to be that Suicune, most likely, who has access to Tailwind, along with probably Snarl and a couple of other moves. And then there is also going to be the presence of that Incineroar, which I think will really help Manuel pilot this team a bit easier than Marco could. I think that Marco just got caught in a couple of situations where he was really struggling to switch Pokemon in and out because a switch possibly meant a knockout if he was caught off guard. And having access to Intimidate and Fake Out, as we saw, certainly makes that switching process a lot easier.
Yeah, and if we cut over to his opponent in Danielle, we'll see exactly why it is going to be a little bit more helpful, because there is that Zacian on the other side of the field. And again, this team looks very familiar, right? Zacian, Incineroar, Rillaboom, Suicune, Nihilego, and Komodo. So again, like you said, having that Intimidate, especially as that's something that you commented on during, I believe, that second game of how there was no Intimidate on the Eternatus side of the field, makes it a much tougher thing to deal with when you can let that Zacian sit in there and not get that attack stat lowered as it goes, especially if you aren't able to get something like a burn from that heat wave when you really desperately needed it.
Yeah, but I just got to take a moment and be a little self-indulgent. Are there any Komodo fans out there? Because this Komodo fan right now is absolutely living. It's not really the Pokemon I honestly thought of when looking at Series 10 matchups, and and trying to figure out, okay, what's going to be a fantastic Pokemon to break the metagame. But given that this team in particular has access to a incredibly strong fire, water, grass core in the form of Incineroar, Suicune, and Rillaboom, in addition to having access to Zacian, that really does free up your last two Pokemon slots, and that they can be more situational, like the Como-O or the Nihilego in this case. So again, going into this game one, I don't think we necessarily see the Como-O in this matchup. And I certainly don't see it in game one, but it could make an appearance if it's decided that, this is the Pokemon to bring against Eternatus and Aegislash.
Yeah, I mean, for a Pokemon with a 4-type Fairy Times weakness, it's not something that you would really consider bringing into a Zacian Xerneas meta here, but it is still one of those Pokemon, it runs that Body Press set, that Iron Defense Body Press set, that can be so tough to deal with. We've seen it on Ferrothorn a lot, just pretty much for at least the past year and a half, I feel like. And then on a couple of other Pokemon as well, where we've kind of seen that set kind of show up more, and, if you let that Pokemon get set up, it can definitely be a lot more problematic. Again, not something you may see. This would be a matchup where it would feel a lot more comfortable coming than, say, somewhere like in front of a Xerneas or a Zacian, right? But yeah, it's still, it's not a Pokemon that's really running big, strong dragon type moves as much as it, as it maybe used to, especially, now that it doesn't have access to that Z move that it was so useful with in 2018, 2019.
It's all right. I'll be here in the back doing the dance for it. But I do want to take a moment to talk about the items on this Eternatus team, because, we were talking about how similar this looks to the matchup we saw last round. The items here really change that upside down. I mean, you have the Volcarona with leftovers instead of Grassy Seed. The Eternatus is the one holding the Life Orb, not the Aegislash. I mean, the Aegislash is holding White Herb, which means a close combat is honestly not as big as a detriment as it was in previous rounds. So I think the fact that the items are so different on Manuel's interpretation of this team is really going to change how this matchup is going to play out as we get started with game one.
Yeah, our leads here, though, Nihilego and Suicune, while Eternatus and Incineroar for Manuel here. So really nice to see, I think, like you said, having that opportunity for that White Herb to cancel out your drops for close combat is something that's really nice. But it also shows this Eternatus is probably not running Meteor Beam.
It isn't, and I think that's honestly a good play, because we saw just how costly that Meteor Beam was on this team in round one. And knowing that, yes, you don't get that special attack boost necessarily on the Eternatus, but having access to Dynamax Beam, I mean, that's still a really powerful attack. And yes, it probably won't do as much damage as the special attack boost would do in the long run. I think that you have to worry about accuracy in these kind of situations, and you have to worry about making sure you're not caught off guard by a critical miss like we saw earlier.
Yeah, Incineroar switches out here for the Rillaboom right on this turn for Manuel's right off the gate, getting this really important grassy terrain up to help get some priority and pressure on the Suicune moving forward. In case the Suicune goes for something like that Tailwind, a Dynamax Cannon from the Eternatus, though, is going to come out first and target into either one of the Pokemon here on Danielle's side, as there was no Protect. Going into the Nihilego does over 50% to that Nihilego. With that Life Orb recovery shows, or recoil shows just how much it's going to take. Meteor Beam, though, comes right out on this turn, so this will allow for a charge up for that with that Power Herb, getting that +1 in that special attack. And if it can get a knockout, that immediately gets at that Beast Boost with +2, which can be really devastating. But it does connect this turn as well into the Rillaboom, does 50%, which would have been a rough spot for that Incineroar to take. But instead a Snarl here from the Suicune, so no speed control with the Tailwind, but instead dropping the special attack stats, most importantly, of that Eternatus.
Yeah, Suicune doesn't necessarily need to go for the Tailwind as aggressively as a Pokemon like Whimsicott does, just because it has the bulk to sit around, especially when it's on the field with grassy terrain and most likely has access to a Barea as its hold item. While the Rillaboom's presence does mean that Suicune has to be worried about a Grassy Glide this upcoming turn, I don't think that would be enough to knock it out in a single hit. and the Nihilego could certainly retaliate and pick up the knockout if Suicune does take that attack. So Daniele in a perfect opportunity to go for something like the Tailwind here if he wants to. Could just continue to Snarl and weaken that Eternatus as well. Both are honestly really viable options right now because there's not much he would benefit from Tailwind from at this point.
Yeah, for sure. Especially, you know, when you're dealing with Pokemon that are all kind of within that same speed. Suicune, like you said, not worrying as much, sends in Rillaboom here for Daniele, getting his own pressure out with Fake Out especially, while Nihilego goes for a Protect here, not wanting to take another Dynamax Cannon possibly. Rillaboom goes for that Fake Out into that Nihilego, not going to have any damage here, while Dynamax Cannon will target into that Rillaboom. So that will still do a pretty decent chunk of damage, even if it wasn't that Suicune that they were trying to originally put that damage onto here. But it is still a pretty good chunk, about a third of that HP of that Rillaboom.
It is, but that's so much less in comparison to what it did to the Nihilego in the previous turn. That single Snarl really is paying off already. And now that the Rillaboom is on the field for Daniele and he can bring his own Fake Out pressure, this could be a great opportunity for that Nihilego to go for an early knockout onto really the Rillaboom at this point. I think that the key to breaking through these Incineroar, Rillaboom, Water-type Pokemon teams is to get rid of your opponent's ability to switch faster than they get rid of your ability to switch. So going for that knockout on the Rillaboom here would mean Manuel only has access to the Incineroar and one other Pokemon, which doesn't have the same great switching synergy that the Incineroar and the Rillaboom have together.
Yeah, and I said Fake Out earlier. I did mean Grassy Glide. I am mixing up Fido Impulso and Suppressa. Sorry for my Spanish here. But the Fake Out from Danielle's Rillaboom goes into the Rillaboom on Manuel's side. Eternatus will be able to go for this Dynamax Cannon, as the Rillaboom on Manuel's side wasn't able to go for that Grassy Glide like it may have wanted to. But this Dynamax Cannon is still going to do a ton of damage, but that Snarl really paying dividends here. Able to keep this Nihilego on the field, who can now go for a Power Gem into the Rillaboom on Manuel's side. Not enough to knock it out either, just gets it down just to 7 HP, but it is still a ton of damage to be able to survive and put back onto Manuel's side.
Exactly, and Daniele making that play there, going for Power Gem instead of the Sledge Bomb, most likely predicting a switch from Manuel into that slot. So playing it safe is unfortunate that he missed out of the KO by what seemed like a damage roll, but at the end of the day, you know, having really at such low health really means that Manuel is going to be forced to switch this turn. A Grassy Glide is not going to deal the damage that he wants it to do at this point in time, and having the ability to match a Fake Out later on in the game is really the most value he can get out of that Rillaboom at this point.
Yeah, Nihilego switches in for Zacian here, who gets that Intrepid Sword boost, but Manuel also makes a great switch in here, brings in his Volcarona, who is going to love staring down this Zacian, possibly with something like a Heat Wave. Dynamax Cannon will not affect the Zacian, though, which was that Nihilego slot, while a U-turn from the Rillaboom on Danielle's side goes into the Volcarona on Manuel's side. So a nice switch in to be able to not deal that Dragon-type damage.
Yeah, and Zacian also can pick up the knockout onto that Eternatus with a Behemoth Blade, or two at this point, thanks to the grassy terrain. The Volcarona coming out on the field does mean that Zacian has to worry about those Behemoth Blades being retargeted, and even though Volcarona is out on the field opposite a Pokemon like Suicune, a lot of Suicune right now are foregoing a Scald or other water type attack just so that they have more access to other supportive moves. And really, even if Suicune did have access to Scald, this Volcarona is in a perfectly safe spot to go for a Quiver Dance, get that special defense boost, and turn that into a 3, possibly 4 hit knockout. So really, these trainers have just been switching back and forth, and it seems like every time one of them gets an advantage, the other one is able to pivot and adjust accordingly, which Manuel dropping the special attack drop on that Eternatus, especially now that it's threatened by that Zacian, is already a great pivot for him to start off this turn.
Yeah, getting that Intimidate absolutely massive here. Sword Stance, though, from this Zacian, not worrying about possibly taking some sort of damage here, worrying about this Volcarona going for its own dance, its Fiery Dance. So two dancers here on the field, able to do a good amount of damage onto this Zacian, I believe, and still get that boost that it so desperately loves to have. But the Scald is going to take that Volcarona down to just over half of its HP. Super effective damage here. So really interesting turns with two dancing Pokemon on the field.
Yeah, Fiery Dance, though, not guaranteed to get that special attack boost, so definitely a bit of a risk, but looking at how much damage it did to that Zacian, it looks like that would have been a 2-hit knockout regardless. So great opportunity for this Volcarona to get that chip down onto Zacian and really start to threaten the other Pokemon that Danielle has. Unfortunately for Manuel, though, the Suicune out on the field does really limit how much Volcarona can do at this point in time. Suicune cannot be flinched thanks to the inner focus hidden ability that it finally gained access to, and because of that, the Suicune should be free to continue to go for Scald onto that Volcarona to threaten the KO. As much as that Suicune probably wants to go for a Snarl as well this turn, I don't think that Danielle can afford to use any other move than Scald, because you really want that Volcarona off the field before it can get to +2 or +3, like, you know, we've seen many Pokemon in this Series 10 format get to as of late.
Yeah, Suicune actually switches out here, though, brings in the Rillaboom, resets that grassy terrain recovery that was lost on that prior turn here. Will at least allow for some sort of a health regain, especially as the Zacian protects this turn to not take any damage. Another Fiery Dance from the Volcarona into the Zacian will not connect due to the protect here, but a Taunt actually was the move that was going into the Suicune from this Incineroar, possibly to stop something like that Tailwind, but not going to matter nearly as much onto a Rillaboom.
It really isn't. And most likely that Rillaboom's holding an Assault Vest as it is, which means it doesn't have any not attacking moves to not use. So, but good information for Danielle that the Incineroar does have access to Taunt, as, you know, taunting a Suicune isn't as detrimental as taunting a Pokemon like Tornadus or Whimsicott, who have Prankster access to Tailwind, but still does limit the options that Suicune can use. And as a result, you know, preventing a late game Tailwind can be really effective.
Yeah, it's also something that maybe if you're facing down a Sword Stance Zacian, you can consider, right? Not something you'll see a lot, though, as the Fake Out goes into the Volcarona to stop it from going for another Fiery Dance, while a Play Rough connects onto the Rillaboom that's swapped in here. Will be enough to knock that Rillaboom out, will possibly allow for that Incineroar to come back in, get another Intimidate down, get some more Fake Out pressure on the field.
Yeah, and the Volcarona not getting a burn or a flame body activation yet either, which is something important to keep an eye out on, as, you know, similar to what we saw in game 1, that is going to become an out for Manuel, assuming that this Zacian is happy to sit on the field and continue going for those sword stances to mitigate the intimidates that Manuel keeps switching in. It is nice for Manuel that he does have Fake Out pressure this turn. A Fake Out plus a Fiery Dance into the Rillaboom would most likely get a KO. You could also certainly target the Zacian as well, but I think that Danielle really needs to protect that Zacian, given that it really is such a key part to his strategy once the Volcarona is off the field. You know, and Danielle certainly does still have a lot of offensive pressure against this Volcarona as well, for the time being.
Yeah, Fake Out, though, goes into a protected Zacian slot, Zacian not wanting to deal with it. However, a Quiver Dance this turn from the Volcarona is going to give it those really important boosts that it loves to have here for that speed and that special defense. The Rillaboom, though, goes for a U-turn into the Incineroar slot. So like you said, a ton of pivoting here by both of these trainers, really, because that's kind of how you have to play when you're working with a Zacian, right? Is you have to pivot to make sure that you're in the right position to start getting those big knockouts without dealing with intimidates.
Or dealing with a Pokemon like Volcarona, who is more than capable of picking up the knockout onto that Zacian at this point in time. The Volcarona in particular, just being next to a Pokemon that knows Fake Out really opened up the opportunity to go for that Quiver Dance. And because Volcarona has the speed boost, like you just mentioned, Maeve, it means that Danielle is forced to send in this Suicune and forced to go for a Tailwind if he wants to maintain that speed advantage on the Zacian. Fortunately for both of these trainers, this game has been so slow that the grassy terrain is also helping heal both Volcarona and Zacian to the point where you might not have to be as afraid of knockouts as you previously, but still a tough position for Daniele, because Manuel is slowly whittling down his options in terms of switching and attacking, and as a result, I think certainly does have the advantage until the Volcarona is field, which I'm curious to see how Danielle's going to go about that. Again, we saw Scald earlier do about 2/3 of damage to that Volcarona. You probably need 3 of them now for the knockout.
Oh, but a Fiery Dance with all of those boosts and another one to boot is enough to knock out that Zacian off of the field. So now even if you do go for a Tailwind, your fastest Pokemon isn't going to be able to deal with it, especially if you go for a Taunt onto that Suicune to prevent it from going for something like that Tailwind here. But instead it's a Scald, and the Scald will go into the Incineroar slot here. Gets it down to under 50% of its HP. There will be no Berry. We saw before in our little sneak peek that Incineroar is safety goggles as well. So really big turn here. I think having that Volcarona now, I believe, at +3 is absolutely massive.
Yeah, and there's only so much Danielle can do at this point to knock out the Volcarona. I think we got some really good information about how the Suicune is trained, and knowing that the Incineroar is just naturally faster than the Suicune, or that was possibly a speed tie, I think is really going to change how this game will be played in Game 2 and possibly a Game 3. But given that the Volcarona is so fast and so powerful at this point in time, even if Danielle goes for fake out into the Volcarona this turn, followed by a Scald onto the Volcarona, it's almost at full health and could burn that Rillaboom with Flame Body. He really needs to be able to hit that Volcarona for big physical super effective damage, and I just don't see that option on his team, as it looks like he's possibly reached that same conclusion.
Yeah, that's about what my face would look like at exactly the same point.
Oh, same.
Right? And that's the loving, like the part that I love most about having these face cams, is that with these finals, with the extra time and preparation with only the 2 teams, is we've been able to put these together and see exactly what these players are kind of going through mentally. And Danielle does not look nearly as comfortable as he maybe did earlier. Fake out into the Volcarona, though, will at least stop this Volcarona from going for anything possibly like a Fiery Dance, while a Parting Shot into the Suicune will allow Manuel to switch out and bring in his Eternatus, which is going to like being out here a lot more than it would have when the Zacian was on the field, and it's still at pretty good health here as well.
And there still is that grassy terrain so that it can heal everything right back up.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially, putting on pressure this turn. Scald once again, though. Scald's going to go into this Eternatus slot, which does very pitiful damage and not effective, but it gets the burn, interestingly enough. So that burn, I think, is the best option that you could have had from that Scald, even if you weren't able to target your Incineroar down. And now this leftovers plus this grassy terrain recovery is going to be really nice for all of these Pokemon to get a lot closer to full HP, even if you are taking a little bit of burn damage as well.
Yeah, I mean, Danielle could have also gone for a Snarl that turn, which, given that it would have lowered the special attack of that Volcarona from +3 to +2, it could have been a fun option. I just think that at this point in time, Danielle is focusing so much on trying to remove Manuel's ability to switch and going for those KOs rather than, thinking about lowering the special attack, that I think that Manuel is going to be able to capitalize on that and go for Fiery Dance into the Rillaboom this turn, probably a Dynamax Cannon into the Suicune. Likely won't knock out the Suicune in one turn, as it is so bulky, but there's only so much damage that these Pokemon can do out on the field for him right now, and with that knockout, that's just one less Pokemon to do it with.
Yeah, one less Pokemon to switch in and out. A Fiery Dance at +3, plenty enough to take out that Rillaboom, while a Dynamax Cannon here into the Suicune slot for Manuel is going to be able to do a pretty decent chunk of damage now. Almost half. I think we saw it did about a third possibly earlier when it was at -1, while the Snarl now is going to bring it back down to that -1 just based on that special attack drop. We'll bring that Volcarona down to +2, which doesn't sound all that great either to be facing, but it is nice to be able to whittle that down as you go. And Danielle is going to be forced to bring in his last Pokemon here to face down the 3 Pokemon on Manuel's side.
I wonder what this last Pokemon is going to be. Okay, I was going to say it's probably going to be that Nihilego. I forgot that we saw it earlier. So there are a couple of options for Danielle here, even though it does not look the greatest. A Protect plus a Tailwind would mean that Nihilego gets the opportunity to attack first. Unfortunately, Nihilego has already gone for Meteor Beam, which does mean that Power Gem probably will miss the knockout on Volcarona thanks to the special defense boost and the fact that it's at full health. But would be a start. It would also be interesting to see how much damage that Nihilego can do to Volcarona at +1 special defense, because given how this game has played out so far, I wouldn't be surprised to see both the trainers in a similar position in Game 2, as we did just see the 3-minute warning pop up on screen.
Yeah, we are getting closer to the end here. Fiery Dance will not go into this Nihilego, who goes for a Protect. Incineroar swapped in as well for the Eternatus. Tailwind does get to go off this turn, but now most importantly, because that Nihilego protected Gabby, you can fake it out next turn and not have to worry about taking a Power Gem, and you know that both the Pokemon on your team can handle Scald a lot better.
Yeah, that's true. That is absolutely true, and it's really interesting to me to see that Manuel's endgame is to send in those Pokemon that are weak to water-type attacks against the Suicune and Nihilego at this point. It just goes to show you how comfortable he is with this win condition. He still has the Pokemon advantage, and even if he were to lose the Incineroar this turn, with Volcarona at essentially full health, I think that he has the HP advantage as well. So just a very comfortable end game for Manuel. Both these trainers most likely taking the full time just to figure out how they're going to adjust in Game 2. As you know, you have this time available to you, might as well use it.
Yeah, Nihilego actually gets the double Protect this turn, which is really important here. Gonna be able to deal with that Fake Out instead. That would have made it so it wouldn't have been able to move this turn. But another Scald from the Nihilego into this Volcarona. Just really little damage for a Scald for a super effective move. Fiery Dance once again into that Nihilego. Not gonna do anything through that double Protect. So now we're hitting this kind of weird spot, Gabby.
We are. I mean, the game is almost over. I think that we should be seeing the 2-minute warning pop up any second now. So again, Manuel's win condition is twofold: knock out the Nihilego or just run down the clock. I was mistaken; it's actually the 60-second warning, which is even better for Manuel. I mean, that's just less time that he has to worry about. We did see his your time clock; it's about 2 minutes 36 seconds, so he can totally just run things down at this point and have a pretty easy win condition on the game. And I think that he's very comfortably going for that option. When you have such a significant advantage and you can see the last seconds of the game ticking down like this, honestly, it's better to play to this condition than it is the like knockout or just the Pokemon condition, because you have way more in your own control.
Oh, absolutely. And it's interesting to see too, Gabby, as we tick down to the last seconds here, Power Gem into the Eternatus does a pretty good chunk of damage, but it's not going to be enough to get it down really to any range where it would matter, as the Protect on that Volcarona means it's not going to take a Scald either. So really great way for Manuel to be able to wrap this game up in his favor as this clock ticks down 2-0. But what a difference, right, between this game and round 1. We're seeing how that Incineroar just completely changes the pace of the game versus bringing something like a Whimsicott with you onto the field.
Yeah, and that's what Incineroar's been known for, I think, throughout a lot of VGC. I was going to try and figure out how many years it's been since we've had Incineroar, but honestly, it just feels like an eternity at this point. But it's, especially when you pair it with Rillaboom, like many people are in Series 10, you're able to just keep switching and using Fake Out and just slow the game down so much as a result. And I really liked how both trainers kind of went for that strategy in this Game 1. And going into Game 2, I think it's something that both these trainers are going to have to bring once again. The way that you deal with your opponent slowing the game down like this is you slow the game down yourself, and you just have these many turns of switching and repositioning. And I think that we're probably going to see multiple games like this, and that's fantastic because it gives us an opportunity to talk about, you know, the player's mindset going into this matchup and focus on that a lot more than we would otherwise.
Yeah, and I think one thing that was really important was being able to get rid of that Zacian, right? Because once you got rid of that Zacian, you were able to move around a lot more comfortably. You were able to set up for that kind of long, grindy end game, but it was far more in control. So
yes.
I think, I love bringing multiple fake out users in front of a Zacian. That's something that I've always thought is a really nice game plan, having the ability to pivot, getting an Intimidate user out there especially. But once you get rid of that, Zacian's your biggest threat. The Nihiligo's not great either, especially, but if you can get it to use its Meteor Beam already, and it can only really do damage with Power Gem or Sludge Bomb, then you can put yourself in a great position, I think, to kind of grind out that end game for this second, or if that has to be for that third game.
Exactly. And I think the benefit that Manuel has in comparison to Danielle's team is that the Eternatus isn't such a key player as the Zacian is in comparison, and as a result I think that Manuel can play this Eternatus a bit more aggressively and not have to worry as much about the defensive aspects of keeping that Pokemon safe, since he has Pokemon on his team like that Volcarona who can take advantage of the slow play, get those stat boosts up, and be just as big of a threat. The thing about Zacian, like you were hinting at, May, that you really have to go on the offense with that Pokemon. You have Swords Dance because it gets intimidated a lot. You have to do those big damage turns with it. Otherwise, if your opponent knocks it out before it gets that opportunity, it's just really an unfortunate Pokemon to lose in that regard. The Suicune is not going to be able to match that damage output.
Oh, absolutely. And even though the leads were the same, the moves have changed, so that Nihiligo swapped out for the Zacian instead of going for a Meteor Beam, while Incineroar said, I don't want to take a Meteor Beam even if you aren't going to do it, so I'll send in Rillaboom instead. Suicune and Eternatus, the only thing still left on the field that could possibly go for any moves here. Eternatus going for a Dynamax Cannon. Will have to be going here into the Suicune slot as it does connect, so it's still going to do a pretty great amount to the Suicune. With actually no special attack drops here and no burn, it gets it down to 50% of its HP, while a Snarl will drop that special attack on that Eternatus. So once again going for that special attack mitigation and not worrying about that speed control so much, as Zacian is one of the fastest Pokemon on the field.
Suicune also put in range of a Grassy Glide from Manuel's Rillaboom, which is going to be something really important for Danielle to keep in mind. I think that it's unfortunate that the Eternatus has that special attack drop, but Manuel can easily make that switch into Incineroar. Even if he does get caught by a Scald for his trouble, we know that Scald is not going to be enough to knock it out in one hit, and getting that Intimidate down onto Zacian as well to mitigate the Intrepid Sword boost is very important to prioritize. So Manuel has a pretty straight play here in this turn. I think that Danielle could catch Manuel off guard if he just immediately switches that Zacian out again, possibly switching back into the Nihiligo to better threaten both the Rillaboom and that Incineroar, but we'll have to see what he went through for here. A Intrepid Sword, or excuse me, a Behemoth Blade into that Rillaboom would also be a pretty strong play.
Yeah, Incineroar, like you said, comes in here. Suicune actually switches out, not wanting to deal with something like that Grassy Glide, possibly. Incineroar coming in for Danielle. Gonna get its own Intimidate down onto both of these Pokemon, get some more Fake Out pressure on Danielle's side of the field, now that Manuel also has his own Fake Out pressure, which he's gonna use this turn on that Zacian with a Fake Out, so no Swords Dance this turn, possibly, if that's what that Zacian may have wanted to go for.
And no Swords Dance this next turn either, because Manuel does have another Fake Out available to him. Obviously, Manuel could opt to go for a different attack, and Danielle could try and go for that Swords Dance regardless, but definitely a tough spot already for that Zacian to be in, as Manuel can begin to switch these Pokemon in and out, and most likely will want to drop the Intimidate onto both of his attacks. Being forced to switch the Zacian out here and send in the Suicune isn't necessarily a bad thing now that Rillaboom has been safely scared off the field, but still going to be a tough spot for Danielle to try and find that Zacian another opportunity to go on the offense.
Yeah, but a great spot here by going for this parting shot into that Suicune that was that Zacian here. Going to allow for Manuel to once again switch his Pokemon around. Could bring in that Rillaboom, who's going to love sitting in front of the Suicune. Could bring in the Eternatus, who also was really comfortable dealing with the Scald. The Zacian is going to have to come back in at some point and get those boosts again. But like you said, this is really where the switching aspect of these matchups comes into play. Eternatus will be the Pokemon of choice here to possibly be able to go for some really strong Life Orb based moves. Another parting shot, though, from the Incineroar on Danielle's side onto the Volcarona on Manuel's means that Volcarona is also going to get its special attack dropped. So Danielle at least prioritizing, I think, lowering the special attack and mitigating the damage these Pokemon can do before they do it.
Yeah, and Manuel sending in the Eternatus over the Rillaboom, most likely predicting that parting shot from Danielle. I think that Eternatus just has a better matchup against the Nihilego or the Zacian with Suicune out on the field already, whereas Rillaboom struggled to be in this position. It's not necessarily like a great position because that Nihilego is, I think, finally comfortable enough to go for a Meteor Beam onto either of Manuel's Pokemon and get that special attack boost and start, building up that momentum that Nihilego likes to do in this game. But definitely more comfortable than a Rillaboom, which would have been a super effective hit easy with Sludge Bomb. To stop the Nihilego, I think that have to be a little bit careful here, but we've seen Dynamax Cannon do so much damage to both the Suicune and the Nihilego between 1 and 2. I don't think he's necessarily in a bad spot unless the Suicune goes for another Snarl, at which point we'll just see another round of Pokemon play out again.
Yeah, exactly. Rillaboom switches in here. Suicune also switches out. Zacian switches in for its place here. So Zacian may have to deal with another fake out on the next turn, or even an Incineroar switch in here possibly. But Eternatus is going to be able to go for the Dynamax Cannon on the first move here against this Nihilego. We saw it did over half damage in that first game, so it was a pretty great chunk of damage here on this Pokemon. If this Nihilego goes for this Meteor Beam, it is not. It's actually going for the Power Gem into the Rillaboom. Still a pretty good chunk of damage with a critical hit here. So it's still nice to be able to get this damage off and not use your Meteor Beam just yet. But that's the tough thing, Gabby. When you've got some Rillabooms on the field and you're switching Pokemon around a lot, you're not doing as much damage and you're recovering a lot.
You are, but I think that's okay for this Nihilego. If, Danielle wants to keep it around to eventually go for that Meteor Beam, you are going to need that recovery, as Nihilego looks like it could be KO'd by several attacks on Manuel's side of the field at this point. I think that if Danielle goes for a Protect on the Nihilego this turn to get that little bit of extra grassy terrain recovery, and then maybe has that Zacian target down the Rillaboom on Manuel's side of the field, even if we do see that Incineroar switch in for Manuel to bring the Intimidate onto the Zacian, you'll still get a good amount of damage down, and the key, knowing that game 1 went to time, is going to be ensuring that you don't have more damage on your Pokemon than your opponents. And there's only so much defensive play you can do while keeping that number approximately equal.
Yeah, Incineroar switches in here, though. Gonna get that Intimidate off. Get, again, Fake Out Pressure. Nihilego goes for the Protect. Eternatus goes for a Dynamax Cannon into that protected slot, so no damage gonna come out here, though. Zacian's gonna go for a Behemoth Blade, not even worrying about getting a Sword Stance up, even if it's been intimidated. Goes for that Behemoth Blade into the Eternatus. Does over 50 HP, 50% of its HP here. So a great amount of damage still, even with that Intimidate on that attack drop.
Exactly, and now the Nihilego has slightly more health available to it percentage-wise than the Eternatus does, and that's really the kind of game plan you have to keep in mind if you're assuming that this game 2 will go to time, which if the pace of play is any indication, I would definitely be keeping that in mind if I were one of these trainers. This next turn is going to be interesting because Danielle does have the opportunity to get the Suicune out on the field again, and it looks like instead it's going to be Incineroar, but you can still lower special attack with parting shots, which is going to be, I think, really important if Manuel does decide to keep this Eternatus around.
Yeah, and I think that there was a the fake out here and then a possible switch in target here, but Eternatus goes for that Dynamax cannon once again. I thought I saw him click Flamethrower into what that Incineroar slot was, so I thought it was going to be a Predict here instead, but that Dynamax cannon still does over half of the HP here. That Life Orb showing exactly how strong that this Eternatus can be. Incineroar will eat its berry, its citrus berry, and gain back a bunch of that HP here, be able to at least deal with some of that damage that it was just taken, but it's not going to be able to take another one of those Dynamax cannons.
No, and you bring up an interesting point about, I guess, reads when it comes to the Eternatus in particular. You know, a Flamethrower read on a Rillaboom switch-in, I think, would have been huge for Manuel, but on one hand, I don't think that Flamethrower would have done too much damage to the Nihilego or the Suicune. And knowing that the only Pokemon that turns the Dynamax cannon into a 0 damage attack, the Zacian, is already out on the field, it's better to just keep clicking Dynamax cannon, as it is your most powerful move by far.
Oh, but it is still going to hurt a lot if you get that Flamethrower off into a Zacian this turn. The Incineroar on Danielle's side faked out the Incineroar on Manuel's side. A Swords Dance, though, from this Zacian is going to allow it to be a lot more difficult to deal with here, just being that much more powerful with its attacks. So interesting, I think, to see for me too, Gabby, is the speeds, right? Because now you know that Flamethrower is faster and there is no Tailwind on the field.
Exactly, and typically Eternatus is faster than the Zacian, so Danielle forced to protect this turn and most likely Parting Shot to get Suicune on the field.
Yeah, a Flamethrower into that protected slot. Not going to be able to do anything, like you said. A Parting Shot here, I believe, from Manuel's Incineroar is going to be going off first. Going to lower the attack and the special attack. Most importantly, going to allow for a switch in here. Something that can possibly do more damage or even get some more pressure on. I think this Volcarona that is coming in is going to be in a great spot. Just because if it is able to maybe get a Quiver Dance off, maybe a Fiery Dance, we know how much damage that can do. While a Throat Chop here from the Incineroar onto the Eternatus does a pretty good chunk, but not enough to knock it out.
No, I think a Flare Blitz might have been enough, given how much Throat Chop did, but it's tough because that attack would have been more resisted. I really like the Volcarona switch in here by Manuel because he already has the offensive pressure he needs to deal damage to that Zacian to pick up the knockout. This is a great opportunity for Volcarona to go for a Fiery Dance to try and get that special attack boost, or really just go for Quiver Dance to get the speed and special defense boost on top of the special attack boost, which we saw made a huge difference in the Volcarona versus Suicune endgame that we saw play out in Game 1. If you can even get it on the Switch, that's going to be so important for Manuel.
Yeah, the Eternatus goes for a Protect here. Zacian switched out for the Suicune to come onto the field. Volcarona goes for a Fiery Dance instead. No Quiver Dance this turn. Will go into that Suicune slot. Doesn't do a whole lot of damage. Gets it down to under half health, but it was pretty close to begin with. While another Throat Chop here from this Incineroar into the Eternatus, I believe, would have been possibly enough to knock out, but not through that Protect.
Could also be trying to catch Manuel's Incineroar coming into that spot. If you are able to catch the opposing Incineroar with a Throat Chop, that means they can't go for Parting Shots, which does put your opponent at a disadvantage. They are forced to switch at the beginning of the turn, which means that Pokemon would be taking damage from what is a Suicune or a Incineroar.
Yeah, a Dynamax Cannon, if it is into that Incineroar, could do enough to knock it out. I think it's going to be close. It is not enough just based on that last turn. It does hang on with 4 HP, while another Fiery Dance from this Volcarona into the Incineroar slot will be enough to pick it off. So no more switching, no more Throat Chops, no more Fake Outs from that Incineroar. Intimidate not nearly as much of a problem with so many special attackers, but Tailwind does get to go up here from that Suicune on Danielle's side.
Finally get to see the Tailwind and the speed control, which means that this Nihilego is going to be so much more comfortable now. It's going to be attacking first. It does still have access to the Power Herb and the Meteor Beam. Can take its pick of targets, as Volcarona has not gotten any boosts at all in this game. Even if the Nihilego does decide to protect this turn just to play things like super safe, Danielle has a couple of turns as well where the Zacian will be faster than that Eternatus. But really, I think the best case scenario for Danielle at this point is Manuel just goes for that final attack with the Eternatus, misses a knockout on his Pokemon, and knocks itself out thanks to the Life Orb.
Yeah, but Power Gem not going to connect on a protected Volcarona here. Scald will be enough to knock out this Eternatus. Eternatus not able to move first because of that Tailwind. Will force Manuel to bring in another Pokemon, get that Eternatus off the field, but he still has 3 Pokemon who are pretty relatively healthy, and by bringing this Rillaboom on, he's going to get that grassy terrain recovery once again. Both of the restricted first off the field now is Manuel's instead of Danielle's, so it's a really interesting piece of information to know now, right? You can still get those that fake out off possibly, or another Grassy Glide to get rid of this Suicune, but I think it's a little bit tougher, right? Because now you have to know that Zacian's in the back.
I think it depends on what Manuel predicts at this point. If Danielle predicts that Rillaboom's going to go for the fake out into the Nihilego and Manuel able to get a Quiver Dance up, I think that this game is definitely much more in his favor. But if Danielle predicts that the Grassy Glide goes into the Suicune trying to find a knockout, this would mean Nihilego goes on the offense, will still be faster thanks to Tailwind, as we did not see the Volcarona on Manuel's side of the field lock in to protect and most likely pick up that knockout. I think that Manuel is in a bit more of a comfortable position compared to where Danielle was in the previous game, if only because Eternatus isn't necessarily the core damage dealer on his team. But if he loses Volcarona and the Eternatus, certainly going to be a tough spot to come back from.
Nihilego protects this turn though, no Meteor Beam. Rillaboom goes for that Grassy Glide into that Nihilego slot, does not connect through the Protect, but a Quiver Dance here is going to be a great move for this Volcarona to go for. Going to get that special attack boost, that special defense boost, and that speed boost to help it combat these Pokemon that are able to utilize Tailwind.
Exactly, and that's the opening that Manuel was looking for in this match. While Tailwind is not over quite yet, there is only a single turn remaining, if my memory serves correct, which Volcarona should be more than capable of protecting during. And once the Tailwind is gone on the field, especially if Danielle doesn't recognize that the Tailwind is almost gone and switches in that Suicune to set it right back up next turn, Manuel's Volcarona is going to be able to go on the offense, pick up the knockout on the Zacian, and start to clean up the other Pokemon as well. Having Volcarona and Eternatus on the same deal damage is a really effective strategy, because you find the opportunities where your opponent is switching because of your Rillaboom and Incineroar presence to go for those Quiver Dances, and that just turns Volcarona into such a threat.
And Grassy Glide is enough to knock out the Nihilego here, so now you don't have to worry about a Power Gem whatsoever. A Behemoth Blade is still going to do a pretty good chunk of damage to you, though. Depending on if you're into that Volcarona, but it is not. It's into the Rillaboom, who is able to get knocked out, but that means you're bringing an Incineroar in as your last Pokemon, which Zacian's not going to love dealing with either, especially if a Fiery Dance is in play after a Quiver Dance here. And that is that enough? Yeah, it is enough to knock out that Zacian. A little bit tough for me to see, but that means that also another special attack boost to this Volcarona. So I know it's not carrying Heat Wave, but at this point, right, you think you're in a pretty good spot to wrap up here. You've got the fake out pressure going in. You've also got a couple of different moves that can possibly do a good amount of damage. Even if you're 2 fire types facing down this Suicune, you still have a bug type move. I believe that there is that struggle bug on this Volcarona, which can do some pretty decent damage, I think. Plus also, if you've got any sort of I mean, fake out might do some stuff, but it's, you know, not going to be a ton of damage in comparison. Fiery Dance, even when you're at +2, I think is going to be a great way. But Gabby, I think if Manuel wins here, I'm hearing a little bit of extra help in my headset, is that he will become the next the MVP of the entire tournament, beating out Yu Shang of China.
Wow. So I'm assuming that means he has the most tournament wins, which MVP would imply. I don't do sports, so please forgive me. The key thing to locking victory, in my opinion, was seeing how much Scald damage that Volcarona took that turn. As you can see, after the combination of leftovers and grassy terrain, it's going to be sitting at about 80% of its health, and that is more than enough to outlast the Suicune at this point. So very, very well played games by Manuel. I think the key thing that he did in both these matches was position the Volcarona so that it got those boosts when it needed the boosts, and then was able to outspeed and just completely out damage the Pokemon on Danielle's side of the field, which is exactly what Volcarona does. It's similar to how people run the Xerneas right now, where you use Geomancy and then you're just faster and more powerful. But you do have a bit more leeway when it comes to setting up the Volcarona, and I think that we've just seen a beautiful showcase of that in this past round.
Yeah, it's definitely great to see that Volcarona shine in a way that we didn't really get to see it do as much in that first round. Interesting to see how these two teams, very similar to that first round. I think the biggest change is having that Incineroar over that Whimsicott. Having that Intimidate and Fake Out user, just something that can apply pressure to Zacian in a way that Whimsicott really cannot, I think is a really nice way to be able to adjust, having different item options as well. I think not having to worry about when you're going to use your Power Herb for your Meteor Beam on Eternatus, and having that Life Orb instead gives you a lot more versatility, especially depending on how matchup dependent you are. And we never saw the Aegislash out on the field, so we never saw that White Herb come into play, but really interesting to see how two teams with 4 out of 5 or so that many similar Pokemon on the team can be built so differently.
And it also goes to show you too just how different the matchups can be between round and round. And I think in particular with Series 10, we've gotten to a point where you see so many Rillabooms and so many Incineroars. You do feel a little bit fatigued by it. I'm not gonna lie, I feel that. But seeing how the items and the moves and how a couple of small Pokemon adjustments really change how you play those Pokemon, I think is really the important thing to keep an eye on in a format like Series 10, where everything is so slow. You have the opportunity to have those little differences just add up over time into something that's really completely different than where you thought you were going to end up.
Oh, absolutely. And it's a great spot for Spain to be in right now, too, if you think about it. Great spot for Spain to end up in, currently 2-0 over Italy in our grand finals. So hopefully Italy can start making that run back. We know that they desperately need it. It's tough. You got to gain that momentum back. We're watching it in the same order again as these guys played these matches. So we're sitting on the edges of our seats, but I'm sure that the people were, a little bit of nail biting, a little bit of, knee shaking a little bit as they were playing these rounds. So we will be taking a quick break. We will be back with round 3 of these grand finals, so do not go anywhere.